So you give the remedy, and then you want to kind of individualize how you even give the remedy. So you don't follow the directions on the package that from one company in France, they suggest taking 5 of those pellets 3 times a day, no matter what the patient, no matter what the condition. So don't ever do that. What you want to do is you want to try to individualize it. Individualizing it is that's the art of the art and science of homeopathy, and it takes a lot of time and experience to get to that point. And that's why these books give you some good general ideas of how to prescribe what potencies to use and how often the potencies should be repeated, depending on if it's acute or chronic or things like that. So I can give you some general tips on that, and I think we'll finish up with that, and then we'll get into some other topics for next month. So in terms of the frequency and the potency, so first of all, these potencies start with, I give you a list here. The lowest potency, not the lowest, but the lowest that I'm talking about is a 6x, and then next highest potency would be 12x, next highest would be 6C, and then 12C, and then 30C, and then 200C, and then 1M, 10M, 50M, CM, MMK. You're going to be working more I would recommend working in depending on how sensitive the patient is or how confident you are, somewhere between the 12x and 30C potency. So some patients are extremely sensitive, and the more sensitive the patient, the lower the potency you should use, because if you use too high of a potency with a sensitive patient, you'll have a lot of aggravation potentially. Now the good news is when you're prescribing it for acute conditions, the more acute condition, the less chance of an aggravation you're going to have. So you're not going to probably see a lot of aggravation using the 6C to 30C potency in an acute condition. You'll probably never or rarely see an aggravation at all unless the patient's very, very sensitive. So you know the patient's sensitive if they're sensitive. So if they are sensitive emotionally, chemically, they're a sensitive patient. If they have allergies all over the place and asthma and rashes and they're touchy emotionally and they're sensitive and the littlest thing makes them upset or cry, that's a sensitive patient. Or every time they take a prescription or over-the-counter medication, they get all the side effects. Those are sensitive people. If they're really sensitive to coffee, they can't handle coffee because they drink a cup of coffee in the morning, they can't sleep that night, they're sensitive. So it's a matter of degree. People can be very sensitive, moderately sensitive, mildly sensitive, or not very sensitive at all. So depending on the sensitivity, you want to kind of use lower potencies and repeat them less often. And you can always kind of figure out how sensitive the patient is, at least to that particular remedy, by their reaction. If you give them a dose and they have a big reaction, then you want to be careful. If they have no reaction, no aggravation, no improvement, you can give it a little more often and see if it works, or go up in potency and see if that helps. Question?
So do you want to have an aggravation of some sort?
Well, for an acute condition, you don't necessarily need to see an aggravation in order to get improvement. But if you see an aggravation, it's usually a good sign. Mm-hmm. And if you wait until the aggravation passes, then usually it's followed by improvement.
Okay.
And I do talk about that in, I can't remember which class, the video last year about talking about how to use the remedy as needed. Mm-hmm. And I'll give you guys a handout on that as well. So there's rules of thumb of how to use the remedy as needed. But like I said, the books give you kind of a general idea of, okay, it's acute and the person is moderately sensitive, so use this remedy and repeat it this often, kind of thing. The other factor in considering what potency is how sure you are of the remedy. So if you're very sure of the remedy, you can go use a higher potency and you'll get a better result. If you're not very sure, then you want to use a little bit of a lower potency, because a lower potency is more likely to work if it's not the right potency or if it's not the right remedy. So if you get a remedy that's similar but not the most similar, so you didn't do the best job of prescribing, you did an okay job. If you use a lower potency and it's the wrong remedy, you're more likely to get at least some response. And the analogy here is like a target. So using lower potencies is kind of like using a shotgun. It sprays everywhere and you get, it might not take out your target,
Right.
but using a higher potency is kind of like hiring an assassin with with a telescopic lens. If he misses
You wanna know the right
slightly,
person.
it's going to miss his target and nothing's going to happen.
Yeah.
But if he's really good and he's a good sharpshooter and gets the target right in the bullseye, then the guy's dead immediately. Or you could even use the analogy of like tear gas for really low potency, shotgun for medium potency, and sniper for high potency. You have to be really, really good at shooting if you're going to use the high potencies. So if you're confident, go for a little higher potency, and you'll get a better result. If you're not as sure, go for a lower potency. At least you'll get some result. You're more likely to get some result. People will tend to respond. It might be more palliative than curative. It might be more like just symptom relieving than curative, but you'll probably see some result. Okay. So if you prescribe a remedy, you get a pretty significant aggravation. The person's sensitive. You want to give that time for the aggravation to pass and wait. Should be followed by some improvement, and then don't repeat it again until the patient stops improving and they need it again. But if you don't get any aggravation at all, and the patient starts to improve, it's not so crucial how often you give it. If you give it a little more often, and probably nothing bad is going to happen because they don't seem to be overly sensitive. So it's not quite as critical how often you give it. There's a lot of leeway for most patients with acute conditions using the potency you're using. There's a lot of leeway. Like you probably could give a remedy sometimes every half hour or every hour or even every 3 hours. And anything in between is probably going to be pretty good or okay. You start using higher potencies, it becomes a lot more critical because someone could have an aggravation, and then if you keep giving it, now they're worse, so I'm going to give it again, and then they have another aggravation. Now they're just getting worse, and you're not helping matters at all. So it really depends on how the patient responds, and if they're responding well, you keep going. If they're not responding well, you kind of have to ask, okay, was that an aggravation, or is the remedy just not working? Do we need to try a different remedy then? So we'll go more into this topic and then back to kind of how to use the remedy as needed then, and then we'll go through the cases, and we'll start talking about some conditions, some treating specific conditions.